All right, so I think everybody's in here and kind of settled in, so we'll go ahead and get started. We are on the next to last Wednesday night of the quarter. So I don't know, it always seems anytime you're teaching to go by way faster in some regards and also way slower in other regards. So yeah, we got 2 lessons left. So tonight will be the last time. Probably, if we get through everything, this will be the last sort of new discussion that we have. And at the end of class, we'll just kind of talk about what next week is going to look like. We'll see how far we get tonight. So I do want to start with a little bit of a review from last time, in case there's anyone who wasn't here, maybe get up to speed a little bit. So we talked about the digital age and kind of the modern society that we live in, how much of our lives is we interact through some electronic means, right? Whether that's phone, whether that's computer, whether that's social media, whether that's we got people watching online tonight at work. I work from home, so I deal with people virtually all day, right? That's kind of the way things are, especially since COVID. And obviously the Bible is not directly addressing social media or things of an electronic nature, but there are some principles that we talked about briefly last week to kind of lay out as a foundation and a baseline for our study, things that we can use to guide our thoughts. And some of the discussion that we have around best practices and ways to handle things. So this is just a few that we talked about last week, and we'll pick up some more as we go along tonight, right? But just kind of starting at the top of the list here in Galatians chapter 5. So we should be working to cultivate fruits of the Spirit in everything that we do, right? So certainly in our interpersonal interactions, but that carries forward to interactions that we have online and through digital means, whether we are specifically identified as ourselves or whether we are kind of anonymous as well. That doesn't really change. All of those things should carry forward. And there's always work to do, at least for me, for sure, always work to do in trying to get better at living out those fruits of the Spirit. We're also to be humble and not, exalt ourselves above others. I think, specifically of the Pharisees and some of the things that they did, like the long prayers to be seen by men and those kind of things. So we're to be humble, and we're to avoid provoking one another or being envious of one another, right? So a lot of that interaction and the way that we deal with people needs to be in a godly fashion. Okay, we talked about in Proverbs the importance of our name and our reputation, and really how that can be tarnished quite easily these days if we're not careful. And the importance of identifying danger and then fleeing and running away from it, not kind of sticking around to see if we can put up a fight or how we're going to do. But hey, we see a dangerous situation. Let's get out of there and go find a better spot to be. Matthew chapter 5, sometimes extreme measures are not just okay, but necessary, right? And I think that's certainly, I know if you ask my kids, sometimes they think extreme measures have been taken against them, I guess, maybe. I don't know how you would put that, but sometimes it may seem extreme or unusual to others around us, the things that are really probably what we need to be doing to protect our kids. We looked at Ecclesiastes, and we discovered that every deed will be judged, whether good or bad. We're responsible for all of the deeds that we do and the words that we say and the actions that we take, and there is no anonymity with God. He knows who we are and all the things that we do, and we're not hiding anything from Him, even though it may be tempting to think that we can hide it from others around us, or we can be a different person virtually than we are in real life. And then we talked about both Ephesians chapter 4 and Matthew chapter 12 last week as specific to our speech, and how speech kind of extends, not just from the things that we say verbally, but, things that we type. You could say things that we share with others or repost, or all of those things kind of carry forward the idea of speech, and those will be justified and either justified or condemned based on how well we do with those things. All right. Anybody got any additional verses that really kind of jumped out to them since last week? All right, we'll go back. I'm only going to do one chart this week. We'll review this one, right? So, a couple things, just a reminder. There's 5 billion user identities, right? So it's not a one-to-one to people using the internet, but that's a lot of people. Okay, so there's an identity out there for 2 out of every 3 people on the planet. People in remote regions, babies, everybody. That's a lot of user identities that are on there. Okay, we didn't talk about this one a whole lot, but that middle green circle right there, 94% of people who use the internet in any way, shape, or form are also using some type of social media, right? So again, there's just extreme market penetration, if you want to call it that, with the social media companies, with folks who are using the internet. If you're over 18, we're getting really close to 90% of people having a user identity for them. And then your average user, specific to social media, so we'll broaden that out a little bit here in a minute, but specific to social media, over 2 hours a day, 2 hours and 21 minutes. Again, that's an average, right? So half of that 5 billion user identities is going to be more than that, right? More than 2 hours a day. That's a lot of time that people are spending on social media and different things. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, just for the purpose of discussion, I kind of broke this down into 4 different concerns that I have. And we talked about time last week. So, especially we in general, and especially kids and especially teenagers of kids, spend a lot of time on social media. And we talked about, a little bit about dopamine and how that works, right? So dopamine is part of our reward system that makes us want to go and seek that particular activity or behavior again. And that can lead to addiction, where people sit around, and it's very easy in a comfortable life that we live of abundance, where you can kind of sit in a chair in front of a screen all day. You can kind of chase that in a number of different ways, right? That could be looking for likes, that could be playing games, that could be shopping, that could be news, that could be general browsing. Hey, I learned something new. Bam, you get a dopamine hit, and that's what you're immediately going to, hey, let me find something else that's new, and that cycle just continues and continues and continues to perpetuate itself, and you end up spending an inordinate amount of time on doing that, and it's especially problematic for our kids. All right, so we'll talk about tonight. We'll start with attention, and hopefully we get through the rest of this. So we'll talk about where our attention, and again, for the purpose of this study, trying to focus in on our kids' attention, where the attention is focused, and some of the issues that can come out of that. Then we'll talk about content. I think everyone understands some of the challenges around content, and then persuasion, right, which you may not have thought about before. But a lot of the misinformation and fake news is focused on political things, but there's also misinformation and fake news around spiritual things as well, where kids can kind of get sideways if we're not watching them and not careful on that. All right. Okay. So, want to briefly review from a time standpoint and kind of reset where we are. So if you look at the pie chart first, continuing with that time discussion that we just reviewed from last week, it's interesting that 36%, right? So 1 out of 3 teenagers self-identify and admit that they spend too much time on social media and on digital devices, right? So 1 out of every 3 recognizes, okay, this is a problem, right? So if you know anything about teenagers, you know that's a pretty high number for kids who are able to recognize and admit that, hey, this is going to be an issue. And then you've got about half, a little over half, that say, hey, it's just, it's normal, it's just about right. And then there's a pretty small balance there that either says, I don't know, or I don't spend enough time, which would be very unusual, okay? Transitioning to attention span over on the chart over on the right-hand side, and you might be able to read that. I can read it from here. I don't know if you guys can read it, but the chart at the top, basically what it's saying is expanding out from social media specifically and just digital entertainment. Again, this is an average, so think about that. And half of people are more than this. Average teenagers spend 7 hours a day on their phone. Entertainment. 7 hours. That's like a work day that kids are sitting there on their phone chasing that stuff. So they go to school, a lot of that has to be happening in class and different things, which is we're going to talk about with attention. So you go down and start working down the circles. So in 2000, they did a study, and the average human's attention span was 12 seconds. Okay? So you fast forward to 2013, and our average attention span is now down to 8 seconds. Okay, so we've lost 30% of our attention span, right? So that doesn't mean that I can only focus on something for 12 seconds. What it means, if I'm like staring back there at the clock, I've got 8 seconds before I'm going to be looking for something else, right? My mind and my brain are jumping to something else. As a reference point, that third circle down there, the dark kind of purple looking one, 9 seconds is the average attention span, I don't know how they measure this, of a goldfish, right? So we're at the point now where the human attention span is shorter than the attention span of a goldfish, okay? And it's hard to say, social media and kind of the snippets that we see now directly cause that, but they certainly correlate with that, right? So you see usage of social media kind of go like this, and you see attention span going down in a proportionate ratio, okay? So what does that mean? What does that look like from an attention standpoint? That's the bottom box in that chart, okay? So 51% of teens say while they're doing their homework, they watch TV. Another 50% say they use social media, again, while they're doing their homework. 76% say they listen to music, 60% doing text messages and those kind of things, right? So the moral of the story is it's really hard for them to focus on one thing, right? And stick with one specific task. So that leads us to our first question here. And so to kind of set this up, this is from a 2010 interview, right? So if you remember, that original 12-second attention span was 2000, and then it's down to 8 seconds by 2013. Okay, so this is more towards the 2013 end of that spectrum. From an interview, this is a professor of something at Harvard. I think it's a medical professor who has studied this, okay? And he says, I think the real danger of social media. It changes the way I process information. Or to be more precise, I no longer process information, I merely consume it. And I speed read hundreds of bits of articles a day, absorbing a lot of information, but rarely actually thinking about it, right? So there's a couple of euphemisms that people use to basically talk about this. So one of those is popcorn brain. So if you're kind of jumping all over the place, that's what that is. The 11-second dilemma is essentially what the social media companies operate off of. They have to capture your interest in 11 seconds, or you're moving on to the next thing, right? So the content that's generated has to do something to pull you in 11 seconds. If it doesn't, you're not paying attention anymore after that. Okay, so our question, right, given that we live in this sort of short 8-second attention span, small snippets of time, kind of instant gratification type of culture, how do we promote meaningful thoughts and conversations about deeper subjects that require us to spend some time thinking about it, right? So things like God, like eternity, and salvation and those kind of things. And just to sort of ground us a little bit, I have 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 7. Paul admonishes Timothy to think over what I say, right? So it's not just listen to what I say and kind of consume it, as our quote alluded to, but really think about what I am saying and what that means and what impact that really has on our life. So, I throw the question out there for all of you. How do we do that? How do we promote this deep thinking, which is completely opposite of the direction that the culture is going? Go ahead, Ben.
Jesus is always going to be our example. So at every age, under the Roman Empire, there were plenty of distractions. And I just read a book, A Day in a Life in Rome, and then the top 8 problems then, or some of the 8 problems that we still have today. Busyness, noise, things like that. But I think as parents, I guess, thinking about ourselves and emulating the schedule that Jesus had. He woke up early in the morning, he went to a solitude place to pray. He was intentional about that. He had just done a lot of miracles the night before. So we somehow need to get that to our kids. So maybe it's on a Sunday, no electronics at all. It's just a day where we have no electronics, where we can talk even more about God after worship services, or designating that time throughout the week. It should hopefully be a part of our normal conversations.
Sure. Yep.
If we're promoting meaningful thoughts, as parents, our minds have to be in the Word of God. And I think one of the best things is teaching children to memorize Scripture. I don't know if there's a better way than memorizing Scripture. We can recite it, we can chew on it and think about it. That will help us to have these conversations and just keep our attention on it even more. So having something maybe even in the home of, this is what we're going to memorize as a family. James 4, verse 8, James says, God says, draw near to me and I will draw near to you. So when we say, well, I don't feel like I'm really that connected to God, well, there's something amiss with us drawing near to Him. And so it begins, I think, with, our minds, things above even more. So I think that's how we can have that impact on our children, but also helping them to understand that as well.
Yeah, so, I definitely, kind of memory verses and memorizing Scripture was one of the things that I had down. We do, we've got kind of a built-in program here to do that. It doesn't take a ton of effort. You kind of got a plan scripted out for us that we've just got to follow, and that's certainly something that's easy that we can ask them about, right? So, we're doing the timeline right now, and so what does that really, why is that important? Why does it matter? Where does that fit in the picture, right? We can ask questions about the different verses or the timeline things that the kids are working on right now to try and get them to process and think about that a little bit.
Maybe take advantage of opportunities that are already in our day, such as when we eat dinner together, turn off the television.
Yeah.
When you're picking up your kids from school, turn off the radio, have a conversation. Using those times whenever there is some captive time where we're doing something together already. Whether you're working in the yard together, take the earbuds out, while you're pulling weeds and, cutting limbs or whatever it is you're doing, have a conversation. Those are all great opportunities to influence our kids.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we talked a little bit last week about, just in the frame of reference of time and how we, pull some time back from them, like Ben mentioned, having some kind of digital fast period, whether that's at dinner or certain days a week, all those are valuable. The rides in the car, that was another one that I had written down, so that is one of my, much to the chagrin of my children, they are captive and they can't run away, and so I can kind of force conversation with them when they're in the car, so I try and take advantage of that when I can. As well, right? So, I think one of the things that's important, to do is, obviously, just like Ben mentioned, Jesus is our example, and if we can emulate him in terms of empathy and compassion for people, and really taking an interest in people. I can do that with my kids. I can be that example of, hey, I'm really interested in you, and I want to know how your day went, and I want to understand the challenges and the problems that you're having, right? And if we do a good job of that, then we just strengthen that relationship with our kids, which helps us to continue to do that, right? And helps us with really all of the things that we've talked about this quarter that require that kind of deeper discussion and some thoughts, some time spent thinking about those things. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially with their younger kids, but this would apply for all of us. Think about how Jesus used what was around him to keep pointing people back to God. So, even when we're outside, getting into a conversation, when you hear a bird singing, or you just see a bird, and asking our children, what comes to mind when you see a bird? And they may say nothing, or they sound nice, or they're I don't know, whatever. But you look at the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus reminds us, hey, look at the birds of the air. Look at how God provides for them. And how much more is he going to provide for us? So even instilling these moments in creation, when you see the birds, don't just see it as just another animal, but it's a way to help them to see God takes care of that animal, and he's going to do even more for us. So whether it's the birds, it's the lilies, so the things that are around us naturally, we don't even at times need a curriculum. We can go outside and see the sun and the sunset and all of that. But those are simple things for young children, to go on a walk or playing outside. But even for all of us who are older, right? Because that's what Jesus kept pointing to, as he's teaching on a subject like worry, and that's a big subject for a lot of us. So
yeah,
it's another way for us to think about it. And Paul did that with sports in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. That the sport or the race that we're in is such a bigger race, right? So we have all of these answers to the things that people are really trying to figure out. I think those are different ways to connect and to help our children to focus on the bigger picture, the true story of reality.
Yeah, so that's a really good transition actually to the next question here. For some reason, my hidden slides are showing up. I don't know why I'm doing that. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit more about attention and anxiety, right? That tends to hold the attention of a lot of kids these days. So 1985, so just as a point of reference, I was 10 years old turned 10 in 1985, right? So that's been a while. They do a survey every year, the American Freshman, so this is College Freshman National Norms Survey. And in 1985, 18% said that they felt overwhelmed by all they have to do, okay? So in 2016, that number was over 40%, so we're getting really close to half. I didn't do it in time to put it in here, but in 2025, it's over 50% that are concerned and have a lot of anxiety about all of the things that they have to do, right? So the question is, like, how do we teach our kids, from a biblical perspective, how do we teach them resilience? How do we teach them grit, right? So Ben talked about the way that Jesus taught, and you can see in nature, God takes care of his creation, right? And if the birds and the animals are valuable to him, how much more valuable are we, and how much more assurance can we have that that we're going to be taken care of, right? But there's a lot of different emotional pitfalls that are awaiting kids right now. So you've got just the general problem of anxiety. You've got, I don't know if you guys, FOMO, right? You know what that is? Fear of missing out, right? Hey, there's this thing that I don't know about, or I'm not going to be able to participate in, or everyone else is going to know about this except for me. And as crazy as it sounds, like that causes anxiety in people and worry, right? So there's a ton of polarization. Everything is seems to be polarized and political these days. Things that have never really been in question. Things like marriage and those kind of things. There's vastly different opinions on both sides, and they're kind of battling one another. Okay, you've got negative comparison. So kids looking at stuff on social media, and okay, my life isn't like that, and why not? And I want my life to be that, and why isn't it? And those kind of things. So, just a couple of reference verses here. Proverbs chapter 12. Anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, right? But a good word makes him glad, right? So anxiety is not a good, not a healthy thing to have and carry around with us kind of long term. Sort of the antidote to that, right, is in Psalms chapter 34. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from all of my fears, right? So we've got the answer right there. So how do we pass that along to our kids, where they are resilient and they've got some grit, and they're able to deal with anxiety and challenges and different obstacles and things that they're going to deal with in life, right? There's a couple biblical characters that immediately come to mind, like Joseph and Job and Paul and Jesus, right? There's a bunch of people we could choose from as an example of, hey, see how this works? You just got to keep going. And it's not always going to work out, and your life isn't always going to be easy, and it's not always going to be great, but you just got to keep going and trust God. How do we pass that along and instill that in our kids? Tanya?
We have a lot of examples of Jesus resting. I think we forget about the power of rest. We try to do too many things, put too many things on our plates, too many activities, too many commitments, but we don't always have time to rest. And so what comes with resting sometimes is the silence, is the clarity, where we're able to actually meditate on God's word, actually hear his voice, actually hear our own voice, and recognize when things are out of sync. So like some of the comments earlier, when we're talking about comparison, for example, on social media, we get a 2-minute snippet for something that took somebody, a content creator, 3 hours to make.
Right, yep.
The sped up version. But rest is really critical, and we see that within both the Old and the New Testament with different prophets. They needed to rest and regroup so they could get replenished by God. So if we're constantly just feeding the machine something, and we don't take that opportunity to rest, sometimes that creates the anxiety and other things that kind of inundate a person's life.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Sometimes you just got to slow down, right? And that helps us with the thoughts and the meditation and thinking about. Let's go, Stephen, and we'll come back to you.
I was thinking maybe that just the idea that we value ourselves because we're made in God's image, and we don't place our self-worth based upon what others believe is important, that I should look like or I should act like, that really God has given me my true value. And then to learn contentment. So set my expectations based on what God's expectations are of me, not what the world's expectations are of me. If you look at Philippians, we're all familiar with how Paul talks about Philippians chapter 4, that he learned contentment. It's something you have to learn. It doesn't happen naturally. I have to learn how to do it. And I learn how to do that whenever I place my value on things that are important to God.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't even know if you'll be able to hear me, but
Yeah, no, I can hear you.
two things. One, kids really do pick up anxiety
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I know out of my kids, Vanessa in particular, if there's something bothering me, she immediately knows what's wrong. I'm like, what are you talking about? I can tell something's wrong. Even though if I think I'm not necessarily displaying that, she knows, right? Kyle?
I was thinking about what we read in Ecclesiastes. There's several passages there, but one of them, chapter 5, verse 10, says, "He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income." This also is vanity. And really throughout Ecclesiastes, he's talking about how we don't find satisfaction in the things in this world, and yet all the things that we're absorbing ourselves with on social media often are exactly that. They're focused on our own gratification, materialism, things that just pop out at us and satisfy us just for a second, and then we're moving on to the next thing. And a substitute for that seems to me to more align with the spirit that Christ tells us to have is when we start actively thinking about people that we can teach or serve in some way, and our life becomes not about ourselves and our own satisfaction, but about helping others, and that really in turn provides a great deal of peace in knowing that you're doing the things that God has really created you for in this world.
Yeah, it's not about us, right? If we can kind of get that message across, that certainly helps. Ben?
Yeah, I was going to mention something similar. Acts 20 and verse 35, it's more blessed to give than to receive. So helping young children, we've already had a number of our children who have obeyed the gospel. How can we help them to engage in good works? That's Titus chapter 3. It's something that we have to learn to do. And so that's a good opportunity, whether it's that and maybe it's helping widows here at the congregation or whatever the case may be. But the more we can help them to serve, that even helps sometimes with anxiety and depression, because we're taking our minds off of ourselves. The other thing I would add too, some may disagree, if a young person can't get their driver's license until 16, then they should be on social media until at least that age. It's just as damaging almost as driving a car, if not worse, with some of the ramifications. And then maybe as parents, helping them, for us, just helping them to see for ourselves, they can only have a certain amount of time. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We think so much about college and we want them to go to college, but how are they going to be successful if they can't concentrate more than 9 seconds?
Yep.
So, we're kind of looking at a bigger picture of, what is this that we're actually, where are we trying to go with this? So FOMO didn't even get coined until like 2000, 2001, so it's a new phenomenon as well.
Yeah.
But somehow we still have to put some kind of boundary around it. And so maybe for us, we can't do that over time. Maybe we can't take on that extra project with the job, where we're not around so much that we're not actually able to help them as well. So that could be something for us as parents to think about while they're still in the house.
Yeah, it takes a lot of effort, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, we'll have to say no to some of our wants.
Yeah. So, y'all covered, I think, everything that I have written down. One thing that I thought of here is, one of the things that it's become last couple years a red flag for me is when my kids say, I'm going to be the only one, right? And there's this kind of anxiety and stress about being the only one, okay? And that could be something, is innocuous as they've got, a program at school where they're supposed to go up and sing, and they're supposed to wear a white shirt or whatever, and we got to go get a white shirt because I'm going to be the only one who doesn't have one. But really just trying to drive home with them, you need to be comfortable sometimes being the only one. So there's going to be situations in your life where you're going to have to be the one who stands up to do the right thing, or doesn't go along with everyone else who's doing the wrong thing, right? You're going to have to be the one who says, I'm not going to go to the party with alcohol or with drugs, or I'm not going to do these things, and really impress upon them that it's important for you to be comfortable and confident with who you are, and that you're doing the right things, and be okay being the only one sometimes, right? Okay. All right, so I did want to reference back to this for just a second here. So the first kind of series of the group of lessons that I taught, we talked about this, right? So this is, again, if none of this stuff makes sense to you and you're like, this doesn't make any sense, like how does this happen? How did so many kids get anxiety and all that stuff? This is a great book to read to help you kind of understand the process there. But there's really three things that happen, right? So that problem with fragility, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, which is what we just talked about, right? So there's this idea that's been driven home with a lot of kids, especially ones in their early 20s, that, hey, that you should never be uncomfortable. If anything makes you uncomfortable, you should, throw up a red flag and say, this is not okay, and their expectation is that they should never be uncomfortable, or that there should never be anything that they don't like happening. And so that leads to a lot of that anxiety and worry that we talked about, because as everyone understands, in life there are times you're going to be uncomfortable, and there is things that you're going to worry about, right? We talked in the lesson about truth, about the problem with relying on our feelings too much. The wisdom literature in the Bible talks about our feelings being deceitful, and that they can't be trusted, and that we've really got to trust God. And then the third part is part of what we're going to talk about next, and really just that this kind of us versus them mentality, right? And that the people who don't agree with me on, whether donuts or breakfast or dessert, right? You have an opinion, and someone who doesn't agree with me, like they're a terrible person. Like that's an awful person because they don't agree with me on something as simple as a donut, breakfast, or dessert, right? And obviously, as you get into more serious topics, that problem extends out and grows and gets worse and worse, right? Okay, kind of with those things in mind, how do I help my kids discern what content, right? So as we're navigating this, and at some point they're going to be exposed to it, regardless of whether we, shelter them from it to the greatest extent or not. At some point they're going to leave the house and they're going to be on their own. So how do we help them discern what content aligns with our values? One of the things is Stephen mentioned earlier, I think it's Stephen, Philippians chapter 4, maybe it's Kyle, being content. Maybe it's Ben, I'm not sure who said it, right? Learning to be content with whatever state I am in. And I think I put that one on the wrong slide, right? But the issue is worse now because a lot of times we're not even seeing the same thing, right? So I remember growing up, there's, at least when I was younger, there was 3 stations, and you had like those 3 to choose from, and you had like the news on one of those 3 channels, and everyone kind of sat around and the news was on, and everyone heard the same news report. Everyone in the country heard the same news report from one of 3 places, right? So we all have this kind of common frame of reference, and you may have a different opinion on the news, but you all heard the same news, essentially, right? So that doesn't exist anymore, right? The content that I see, and certainly, when it comes to news and those kind of things, is radically different than what my kids see, which is radically different than what my parents see, right? It's all customized to the things that we click on and interact with, and they feed you more of that stuff. So it's a problem that kids think everyone, and adults is alike, think everyone is seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, right? Okay, everyone is seeing this. Why does that person have this opinion, or why is this a problem? Everyone's seeing this, and this person over here is saying the same thing about them. Okay, I'm seeing a completely different set of things, and how does this person disagree with me? Well, because you're being exposed to and being influenced by completely separate, oftentimes opposing points of view. So when it comes to our kids, how do we reconcile that, and how do we help them say, okay, this does not match up with God's word, and let me go find something that does, right? How do we do that? Does anyone have any creative ways or things that have worked for you in the past? So what kind of things should we be thinking about? Okay, now I see where I messed up. Okay, so Philippians chapter 4, before Paul talks about being content, before that he talks about the things that he should be thinking about, right? So excellence, truth, what's honorable, what's just. These are the things that we need to seek out, right? And then he goes on in a couple of verses to talk about being content in whatever state he's in. So, I think from a alignment on content standpoint, right? I feel like we've said this every week, and I certainly feel like I've said this pretty much every question that I bring up. One of the answers is you got to have great communication with your kids, right? At the end of the day, if you're not communicating with them and you're not understanding the things that they're seeing and how that's different from what you're seeing, and you're not able to have a conversation where you can kind of guide their decisions and the things that they ask questions about, hey, so what do you think about that? Or why is this certain thing, do you think it's a problem? And if so, why or why not, right? Just really opening those lines of communication. I don't know if you have your hand up or if you...
Well, TV, like YouTube is now being watched more on TVs than cell phones. So, I think YouTube is basically going to be the new TV. So there's ads if you're watching a show or something like that. You can play Spot the Lie. So, Spot the Lie could be an atheism, it could be an evolution, it could be a commercial about 64 billion years ago with the new Jurassic Park movie that's coming out later on this year or next year. But, hit the pause button and talk about, okay, what was said, what's actually true, and why is it true? Those are some, if you're going to watch it, if you're engaged in something, or if it's a commercial and you're listening in the car, you can do the same thing. Or if it's a billboard, while we're driving around or something like that. So those are some opportunities to interject and to plant some seeds of faith. Okay, let's see what the Bible says about it.
Yeah, so I think about going to the Perot Museum and walking through that and seeing things. You're like, okay, let's talk about this, because that's absolutely not true. That's easy to do when they're standing right next to you, right? Much harder to do when they're in a separate room on their device looking at stuff that you're not always aware of. So it takes a lot of effort, and it is certainly challenging. And from a parent standpoint, there's thing that's alarming to me, even though my kids are a little bit older now, most of them anyway, is a lot of the places that you used to not really have to worry about. Like, hey, I can, my kid can watch Cinderella or Snow White, and it's not really a problem. Now, that's not always necessarily the case, right? So I always tell people, just go buy the old DVDs and put those on, and then you don't have to worry about any of the modern stuff, because you can get crossways real quick. All right, so we've got 2 minutes left. So I was afraid that we would not get through everything, and I was correct. So what we'll do next week is we'll finish up. So we've got another question on content, and then a couple questions on persuasion and how we can be influenced by social media. And then the balance of the class next week. So I left my USB drive at home, so we don't have the sheets, but I'll have them on Sunday. But really just looking through the list of topics that we talked about this quarter and trying to find common solutions that apply to all or most of those, right? So like I talked about communication today, that's a common theme with most of the things that we've talked about this quarter is we've got to be able to communicate with our kids. We've got to be talking to them. We've got to have a good relationship with them where they can ask us questions and we can talk about things and have discussions about it, right? So things like that, kind of looking through what are 3 to 5 things that I can take away from this that are important for me as a parent or grandparent, uncle, aunt, whatever your relationship is, just somebody who's a member of our congregation and loves and cares about our kids. What are a couple of lessons that we can say, hey, these are broadly applicable to all of the things that we've talked about this quarter as a way of kind of summarizing and wrapping up for Q1. All right, thanks. I appreciate everybody's comments and time tonight, and we'll see you next week.